Hi, this is Jessie Graham at Human Rights Watch in New York. I'm here with Ilaria Allegrozzi. She's our senior Africa researcher. And today we're talking about her coverage of the crisis in Cameroon. Ilaria has used open source techniques to cover issues of counterterrorism and torture in the region, in the whole Central African region, but most recently in Cameroon. And she was just denied entry to the country. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But we need your questions, so please let us know. We are hoping that we have people from the Cameroonian diaspora watching this. We're hoping that we maybe have people in Cameroon watching this, that we have an audience that is going to be informed, but also we want to bring this undercovered issue of the crisis in Cameroon to a wider audience. So I'm really glad that we're talking about this today. So Ilaria, just tell us what happened, like what you couldn't get into Cameroon. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, exactly. I was denied access to Cameroon last month when I landed in Douala with a valid visa. I was very surprised to see that the police was waiting for me at the exit of the plane, and it was not a nice welcoming. Since then, I was sent back without any explanation, and we have tried to seek this explanation from the authorities without, unfortunately, getting any feedback, and we are very concerned from this denial of access.
Because what does it mean? What does it mean if you can't get in to document abuses there? What does that mean for the government? What does it mean for the players in the crisis there?
We believe that this decision of denial of access is clearly linked to the work that we have been doing on Cameroon, documenting abuses by the security forces. And we're concerned because it's a clear step back for Cameroon. It means that the country is afraid of international scrutiny, and they have things to hide from human rights organizations which are doing a very important work in the country, especially now to document abuses unfolding in the Anglophone regions. So the country is trying to keep everyone in the dark, but we will continue to do our work of documenting and reporting on abuses.
So we're going to pull back a little, just see if we have any questions. Yeah, we had one that I think that came in that I think is more sort of a complicated question. So I want to pull back first to just talk a little bit about what is this conflict? Where does it come from? We call it a crisis. And you know, my knowledge of, I think, say when I was in West Africa in the 90s, Cameroon was a very stable country. There was always this Anglophone region, but what is bubbled up? Is it a new thing, or is it something that was festering?
Yeah, I mean, it's not exactly a new thing. It's not a surprise that this crisis has now escalated. It is a long-standing issue and only resurfaced with more violence and more strongly in late 2016 when students, teachers, lawyers, the general population took the streets to claim more recognition for their political and cultural and social rights.
These English speakers?
In the English-speaking regions, in the northwest and southwest region of Cameroon. Unfortunately...
How many English speakers are there, and how many Francophones? And have the Francophones always been in control? Or?
Yeah, Francophone regions are the majority in Cameroon, and we only have two English-speaking regions. Cameroon is a bilingual country, and is also has a bijural system.
And give us a sense of where Cameroon is for people, like where it's placed and sort of where it fits in, I guess, politically in West Africa.
Central Africa, of course, bordering...
Central Africa.
Central Africa, bordering Chad, Nigeria, and the two English-speaking regions are exactly bordering the Nigeria, a couple of states in Nigeria. I just wanted to say that, again, this issue of the Anglophone crisis is not new, but the response from the government has been very brutal. And this has only contributed to make the crisis worse and to grow resentment and frustrations among the Anglophone community. The government has responded by shooting at peaceful protesters, arresting hundreds of peaceful demonstrators, and shutting down the internet for almost 4 months in 2017, banning civil society groups. So this has created more frustration, and since then numerous groups have emerged. Some have taken up weapons to fight against the government and have targeted the security forces, have targeted state emblems, and the government again has responded with violence. And this has been escalating since, I would say, late 2017, and now we have a crisis which has also terrible humanitarian consequences. Over 500,000 internally displaced, both in the north and southwest, and up to 30,000 refugees in Nigeria. A crisis which doesn't make to the headlines, unfortunately, and but people are in desperate need of protection and humanitarian assistance as well.
And now you can't get in there to document the abuses.
Yeah, I think the government is trying to make things for us more complicated, but we're not going to stop at that, and we do have means to overcome these access challenges, and we're going to try to use other techniques to document abuses as they occur in the Anglophone regions, notably by using open source investigations techniques and analyzing numerous videos and a bunch of pictures and footage which is coming out of the Anglophone regions, also thanks to people who are very active on social media. But we are going to also try to rely on our contacts on the ground, and I think having a solid contact network is key to do remote research.
And this is something that you were doing. Ilaria just joined Human Rights Watch in December. Before that was doing this work with Amnesty International, and has won an award recently. Amnesty and the BBC won an award for doing this kind of open source investigation, the anatomy of a killing. Can you explain a little bit of that, about what that technique is and how it's played a role in your document, a little bit more of how you use it here?
Yeah, open source investigations are very important to document abuses, human rights violations, and we have been using that both at Amnesty International and at Human Rights Watch. It basically deals with analysis of data available on the public domain, on the net, on the internet, on social media, on Twitter or Facebook profiles, and it's amazing how many data and how many information you can find out there. So in the case of Cameroon, we have used several of these techniques to uncover, among other things, the torture and incommunicado secret detention in military bases, thanks to a collaboration with forensic architecture, and with the BBC at Amnesty, I collaborated to analyze a very brutal and very graphic video showing the execution of 2 women and 2 children by the Cameroonian security forces.
And so you were able to take the video and verify it, but also build a story, trace back.
Absolutely. I think it's important to, for an open source investigation to be paired with a more traditional type of research with information coming from the ground, accounts from eyewitnesses and victims. And in the case of Anatomy of a Killing, we have been able to, first of all, geolocate the video, understand where it was filmed, and we have also extensively analyzed the dialogues in the video to get a sense of where the soldiers were from, what kind of language were they speaking, and we have also done an analysis of their uniforms to actually understand that they were uniforms from the Cameroonian army as well as weapons. So we identified a specific weapon which was used by the Cameroonian army, and that's how we spotted, and that's how we could also uncover this specific incident.
It's so interesting and so much a part of our work here now. And now you're getting a lot of questions, so I just want to, we can come back to that, but I just wanted to see, let's see. Oh, this is an interesting question, like just, it speaks to why you're in New York this week. It's terrible. Someone says, why is the UN not taking any steps?
Well, it is not exactly true, I think, and I am here in New York this week because early this week there was a meeting on Cameroon at the UN Security Council. It was an informal meeting, but it was still, I think, an encouraging and positive step, which showed the interest of the international community to discuss about the consequences of multiple humanitarian crises unfolding in Cameroon. Now, of course, we don't think that this is enough, and we want the Security Council to take a step forward and to discuss Cameroon more formally, to put it higher up on its agenda, and to regularly discuss not only about the humanitarian crisis, but also about the underlying causes of the crisis in the Anglophone regions, and especially human rights abuses. I was pleased to hear messages from some of the council members about the need for accountability for human rights abuses. This is very important, and I think it should be said more often. There was, I think, less engagement from other council members, and we would like, in particular, countries from the African Union to be more proactive and to step up in addressing the crisis in the Anglophone regions.
I think you answered someone named Chinua Marshall. Chinuna Marshall asked, what is HRW doing to escalate recommendations to the UN? So I think you kind of answered that, but
yeah, we are trying also to keep up the momentum. There's a momentum now that we should take advantage of. There's more interest in the crisis in Cameroon, and more countries are caring about it, and also more media attention, which is very important. That's why we want to talk to you and talk to the media to raise awareness about what's happening there. There's somehow it's a forgotten crisis, and we need to talk about what's happening, about the human rights abuses, about the humanitarian consequences of the crisis, and we want to share also what the people on the ground told us, their stories and their experiences.
do you how do you deal with that when a country just isn't on the agenda? Like, are there business interests also? Are there ways that other ways to bring this to the forefront?
We are trying to take advantage of each and every public event on Cameroon. This week was the UN Security Council meeting. Next month will be another meeting of the UN Office for Central Africa. We're also trying to work more in collaboration with other NGOs, other like-minded civil society groups, to try to bring up the same messages and shed a light on what's happening there. So I think joint work and joint efforts are very important to raise awareness.
Ali Thornton asks, what can other countries like Canada do to help with this crisis? Is there a Canadian angle?
Canada has an embassy in Cameroon, and I was in touch with the Canadians and as well as with other countries which have diplomatic representations in Cameroon. I think everyone has a role to play in order to shift the focus from the humanitarian crisis to the human rights crisis. That's what we want. That's what is more important than ever at the moment, to talk about human rights abuses and talk about accountability for these abuses. So far, abuses are happening in a climate of almost near complete impunity, and no one has ever been held accountable for those. So there's a need to talk about it and to try to address it.
And you talked about there's this crisis going on with the Anglophone region. There's also Boko Haram activity in a region in the north, right? Is it? And
in the far north.
Far north. And I mean, how do we? There's another question here about that. How come we don't see this critical situation on main international media? What's blocking the spotlight to expose these issues on a bigger media stage? Jennifer Achu Tangji asks.
Well, multiple questions. I think that first of all, it's true that the country is facing multiple crises, and it's probably facing one of the most challenging periods of its history, recent history. There's a conflict ongoing in the far north with Boko Haram. While it's true that Boko Haram has been weakened, it has not been defeated yet. So it still poses a significant threat to the civilian population and to the security forces. We have seen a recent escalation of attacks by Boko Haram since January this year, with more deaths, with more destruction, and aggravating also the already bad humanitarian situation in this part of the country. In addition to that, we have just spoken about the Anglophone crisis in both the north and southwest. And let's also remember that in the eastern part of the country, bordering Central African Republic, we have up to 200,000 refugees coming from Central African Republic, and the security forces are facing threats from rebels from Central African Republic, irregularly raiding that border area. On top of everything, there's also a political crisis in Cameroon since the elections, and especially following the arrest of the main opposition leader.
Actually, someone from inside Cameroon is saying, her name is Veronica. This is great, Ilaria. Today we're experiencing another lockdown because of the upcoming 20th of May celebration in Cameroon. So people are, what is it like day to day for people? What are you hearing from your contacts?
Lockdowns are unfortunately very common in the Anglophone regions, in several cities and villages across the north and southwest. This has been one of the civil disobedience tactics used by the Anglophone communities and led by the armed separatists to boycott their daily life in the Anglophone regions. Alongside with other tactics like enforce a boycott on school, for example. This is making life for people there very difficult to carry out daily activities, to go shopping, to freely move, and it's impacting the economy in the region. It is a very volatile situation, I believe, and there are a number of security challenges for people to address every day.
This is a very specific question, just about people with disabilities. Where was that? Is HRW documenting the impact of the crisis on the Anglophone regions? Specifically for people with disabilities in that area, especially with lockdowns like that.
Yeah, I'm glad someone brought up this question, because we are actually doing some research on the impact of the crisis on older people and people with disabilities. And we are going to publish a report on that probably in a month or so. This crisis has impacted people with disabilities in a disproportionate way. We have spoken with people who have been left behind, who have been abandoned, who have faced greater challenges to flee, for example, when their communities came under attack. And so we want to highlight also these challenges, their needs, to make sure that the humanitarian assistance addresses their specific needs and is more inclusive. There have also been, we have documented, targeted incidents vis-a-vis people with disabilities. Some have been shot, some have been killed, some have been directly targeted or even discriminated because of their disabilities. So, for example, I've spoken with someone who was being displaced and couldn't find any hosting family because of his disability. So there's sort of stigma and discrimination, especially with people that have mental disabilities as well.
And it's something we see in crisis, in other contexts, but great to pay attention to and to hear that people are engaged in that. What else do you want people to know? I think we're getting maybe a couple more questions, but is there anything we're missing here or something? The status of negotiations and dialogue. That's what, there was a long question actually from someone named, surname I think Richard. I'll give you the summary of it. There's much talk about national dialogue in Cameroon. And the president recently claimed on Twitter that there is dialogue, that dialogue is ongoing. I wonder who the government is having dialogue with. Moving around holding town hall meetings is not a dialogue, and the international community must do more to pressure the Cameroonian authority to open up genuine dialogue. So Yeah, that's from
Yeah.
Nadib Ford Richard.
Well, I think that there's no doubt that unless some process of dialogue is started, this crisis won't be resolved.
And dialogue between, if you can just say who the parties are, so people
Between
know.
the government and the Anglophone community as a whole, which means the diaspora outside, which means civil society, but also those who have taken up arms and are representing the armed separatist groups. I think there was an encouraging, I would say, step from the government announcing that dialogue will start. Some people believe that this is too little, too late, but I think it's too soon to judge now and to assess where this is going. But the Prime Minister was in Bamenda, which is the main city in the northwest, and also in Boya. Now, I think, again, it's too soon to judge, but there should be an inclusive dialogue in order to address this crisis more appropriately.
And the president is using Twitter, and it sounds like various groups are using social media. How does that work? Is it fomenting the crisis? Is it, and obviously it also has given you a window into what's going on there.
Yeah, I think social media has played both a positive and a negative role in this crisis. Very positive because thanks to very active people on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook and other platforms, we have been able to document a number of abuses and to denounce this and to try to seek accountability for those. So it's a precious source of information, but I do believe it has also been misused somehow and used also to fuel more violence and to encourage hate speech. So I think it's both ways, but without social media today we couldn't really document anything. So it's important, like, also to have this dialogue on Twitter and like to engage people as much as possible. And we are grateful for people following us and for sending us information about what's happening on the ground. We need this more than ever, given the lack of access. So we really encourage people to reach out to us and to be active and provide us with information.
And we should post your Twitter handle on this feed. And given that there is information coming out, there is active social media. Again, why is there so little media coverage internationally on this? I mean, the BBC did this big project. Obviously, the BBC World Service does good coverage. Like, there's certain pockets of, but why do you think it's undercovered?
Well, I think one of the reasons why this crisis is undercovered is the fact that the authorities are not making the work of journalists and independent monitors very easy. Journalists are often blocked to report on the current crisis, as well as human rights organizations. We have been blocked. A government which says that it's serious about human rights and blocks human rights organizations, it's very problematic. So the government is putting obstacles for independent coverage, but at the same time, internet was also blocked for a few months, so this contributed to both lack of information, but also galvanizing more more people active on social media, especially from the outside. I think there is an increasing interest from the media. I've been doing lots of interviews in the past week, and we hope that this will continue. This will continue both from the French media, but also the English media.
And you're seeing, what about your partners on the ground, human rights defenders, people who are really, is there a network of people in Cameroon who are trying to document human rights abuses and trying to get this, through social media, or are you in contact with people there?
Yeah, there are a bunch of people who are doing a great job in trying to document as much as possible what's happening on the ground, despite the challenges, security challenges, but also threats of intimidation and reprisals. They need a backup, they need to be supported, and they need to be encouraged. And in this context of shrinking of political and civic space, their work is the more and more difficult. So we have seen human rights defenders being harassed, intimidated, as well as journalists or political opponents. For example, look at what's happening with the crackdown on political opposition at the moment.
Just want to see if we have one more question, and then I think we'll wrap up. What about the African Union? Gerald Della asks, in your opinion, why is the African Union so mute on the war in Cameroon? That's his opinion that it's mute, but yeah.
Yeah, that's what we also noticed this week at the UN Security Council meeting on Cameroon, and that's why we are asking for a more proactive role to be played by neighboring countries to step up and help Cameroon addressing the crisis. There should be a more engaged role played by the African Union and even the African member of the Security Council, like South Africa, for example, like Cote d'Ivoire. They've been pretty silent, but we want to push them to be more active.
I think we're sort of out of time, and if we have more questions coming in, you can post them in the feed. Is there anything else you want to say?
No, thank you very much for following us and for your interest on this crisis.
Thank you, Ilaria Allegrozzi, Senior Central Africa Researcher at Human Rights Watch. And so you can look out for her. What's your Twitter handle?
We'll post it.
Okay, great. And take a look at our Cameroon work, which includes videos, which we've been showing throughout this, this discussion at hrw.org. Thanks a lot.